I'm Mark Golub, and in the news, headlines everywhere that millions of dollars raised by the United Nations and by a California-based Christian relief organization named World Vision, which were meant to help the Palestinian people, especially those in Gaza, actually have gone to the murder organization Hamas. According to Israel's internal security agency, the Shin Bet, more than $50 million in charitable funds have wound up in the hands of Hamas to build a Hamas military base to fund their murder of Israelis. This may well turn out to be a scandal of immense proportions, tarnishing the already questionable reputation of UNRWA, the UN refugee agency, which only deals with Palestinian refugees. Understand, a separate UN agency deals with all the rest of the world's refugees. But the Palestinians have their own separate United Nations Relief Agency, UNRWA, with its own set of rules for defining who is a refugee, whether a child is also considered a refugee, how long refugee status extends, and what conditions do or do not terminate refugee status. UNRWA has its own distinct rules for each of these refugee issues, in marked contrast to the rules that apply to every other refugee in the world. And UNRWA is now being accused of its money earmarked for civilian social projects going to fund Hamas terrorist murder. Well, what's behind the story? And is it likely to generate any consequences? For some insight, we're joined once again by the outstanding senior online editor for Commentary Magazine, Jonathan Tobin, who joins us from Philadelphia. Jonathan, it's good to have you with us again.
Great to be with you, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Jonathan, you recently wrote an important expose of this entire scandal of money being siphoned off to Hamas. From your perspective, what are the salient details?
Well, I think our viewers have to understand first, this became newsworthy because a couple of weeks ago, within days of each other, two cases were uncovered. One involved, as you stated previously, World Vision, an international Christian charity that focuses on helping children and the poor in Gaza. It's an international charity. And what was discovered was that its local agency head, the executive person running things in Gaza for it, had been siphoning off tens of millions of dollars from that was supposed to be going for the purposes for which it had been donated to helping the poor, helping children in Gaza, and the money was going straight to Hamas. This is an outrageous scandal.
Outrageous, yes.
And it was just brazen, sort of double booking, the kind of corruption we might see in a city agency anywhere in America when a crook gets yes. hold of a city official. The technique of it is pretty standard fare. Yes. But what is amazing about it is that this is a respected charity that was supposedly monitoring its donations. That had continued fundraising on the premise that it was helping kids and helping poor people in Gaza, where there are poor people, where the situation of people is dire at times. And it was just going to Hamas, going straight into their coffers to help fund their arsenal of rockets that are fired at Israel, their infrastructure projects, which are not bridges and roads, but bomb shelters for the bombs, as I like to say, for the rockets and for their fighters, and principally also for building tunnels that go under the border with Israel, which they can use for kidnapping and murder raids into Israeli territory. The same week, we learned of another scandal, this one relating to the United Nations, where it was discovered that an official who was in charge of UN building projects and tasked with the effort to rebuild homes that had been destroyed in the 2014 fighting between Hamas and Israel, of which most of those homes have not been rebuilt by the UN or by Hamas, and was taking building materials that were supposed to be going for rebuilding homes. And the question of building materials is a hot one because Israel has, with reason, been trying to limit the import of cement and other building materials because they were rightly fearing that those materials were not going to rebuilding homes, but were for building Hamas fortifications or rebuilding Hamas fortifications, digging more tunnels, under the border and also inside Gaza, where Hamas officials, their rockets, their fighters can hide. The thing about Gaza, it's like the New York subway system. It's probably got more tunnels per square foot than any place in the world now.
Yes.
It's like a mole city.
Mm-hmm.
They just dig. I mean, it's not a big territory, as anybody knows, looking at the map or has been there or been along the border. I mean, it's a relatively small place. And it has got a whole underworld city now. It's like out of a sci-fi picture, which is all for their military infrastructure. And as it happens, this UN official, local Palestinian, was taking these building materials, and instead of building houses, he was building stuff for Hamas. He was giving Hamas to build it. Those are the facts. Let's now talk about what was the reaction. Well, the UN went into its normal denial, claims they'll investigate, casting aspersions on the Israelis for suspecting the foul play. World Vision, I don't want to cast aspersions on them, but they were like, well, we didn't know. They were claiming innocence, and perhaps they were innocent. Perhaps they had been asleep at the wheel or been taken advantage of by their local Palestinian employees, but they didn't have a very effective response either. So we've got these two scandals. It's terrible. We throw up our hands and we say, oh, isn't it awful? We know there are people in Gaza that need help, and the UN aren't doing it, and even outside groups are being hoodwinked, and they're not doing it effectively.
Okay. Jonathan, I want to see if we're talking about the same person. I've read about Mohammed el-Halabi, who on August 4th, the Israel's Internal Security Agency, the Shin Bet, announced it had arrested him. He is the head of World Vision's Gaza Strip organization, and he's accused of having siphoned off more than $7 million a year, every year, since 2010.
A million here, a million there. Pretty soon you're talking real money, right?
Yeah, right. And he gave it to Hamas. El-Halabi is also accused of having given Hamas another $800,000 meant by World Vision to be used for civilian projects so that Hamas could build this military base in Gaza. And my understanding is that World Vision Germany and the government of Australia have now frozen donations to these programs, but this is not the case here in America. Do you have any sense of the American reaction to the emerging scandal as you have described it? And again, I want everybody to understand, while Jonathan has written a terrific piece, you should look it up on Commentary's website, he's not the only person to have written about this. Elliot Abrams has written about it. There's a story about it by NBC, and NBC often would never touch a story like this. Nitzana Darshan-Leitner of Shurat Hadin, which is this Israeli legal fund, has also made a big issue of this. And evidently, Jonathan, UNRWA actually handed over rockets to Hamas, and el-Halabi implicated his father, a senior official in UNRWA, as being a member of Hamas and aiding the terrorist group through his leadership position. My general question for you is, first of all, anything you want to say about all of these facts in general? And then, what have you seen the United States on any level doing in response to all of these revelations?
Well, first, the way you've stated it is essentially correct. It's a complicated story. World Vision is an international charity at its various branches, and they have reacted in various ways. I think the American branch hasn't quite figured out what it's going to do. And we also have to understand that a lot of the people involved in raising money, especially for the Palestinians, are predisposed to suspect Israel, to think the best of their clients, of the people involved. So I'm not surprised that reactions have varied. I'm not surprised that the American branch has been slow to react. As for the details about the UNRWA's involvement in this and the person who was arrested fingering his father, I mean, no honor among thieves, obviously, but I think there's a broader issue at hand, and but I'll go straight to your question about what the United States is doing, and the United States isn't doing much.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. This is not an issue that the Obama administration really wants to touch with a 10-foot pole, any more than it really wants to go into the provenance of its own aid to the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank and where that money goes. And we could spend a whole program talking about corruption there.
Yes.
Which I want to get to in a minute to give context to this, because I think that is as important as the details of these scandals.
Yes, please.
But in terms of what the United States is doing, the United States is, when pressed, issuing statements saying that they think it's a bad thing if there's been corruption, and calls for investigations, but it's not really taking action any more than the United States has ever done anything to try to rein in UNRWA, as you say, the one UN agency that is devoted totally to the Palestinians, while the rest of the world has to make do with one other one. The United States has never had any appetite for going to battle with UNRWA. And let me say something else. Neither really has the state of Israel. As much as Israel deplores UNRWA's actions, as much as Israel deplores the fact that UNRWA's purpose is not to help the Palestinian refugees or resettle them or make their lives better. UNRWA's purpose is to perpetuate the Palestinian refugees. Okay.
Yes.
And Israel takes a very dim view of that. But on the other hand, Israel has never been that eager for cutting off all funds to UNRWA, because they fear, as with other Palestinian causes, that if the UN is out of business, is forced out of the business, Israel will be forced to take responsibility for it, and that's not something they want either. Mm-hmm. So, it's a complicated question as far as what outside parties are doing.
Yes, it's sort of a catch-22 that Israel is in, correct?
Absolutely.
Yes.
But if I could, I think it's just as important as examining the details of these cases to put it in a broader context of Palestinian society and Palestinian politics as to why these things happen so frequently. These are just two cases. It's not like this hasn't happened before. As to what is going on there and why this is tolerated, and why say, you and I are talking about, why aren't the people of Gaza up in arms about this? There are no demonstrations going on in Gaza outside World Vision headquarters or UNRWA headquarters about, give us the money that should be going to help us. Not at all. The Palestinians are pretty much silent about it, if they're not just, saying that the Israelis made it all up. And the reason for that is that the political culture of the Palestinians has never, and will never until it changes, prioritize the improving of the lives or of the whole well-being of the Palestinian people. The priority for them remains the war against Israel, this century-old war against Zionism that dates back long before the birth of the State of Israel in 1948. That is the essence of Palestinian politics. And everything else is subordinated to it.
Yes.
That's why there's no big pushback in Hamas, in Gaza, from the people of Gaza. I mean, they're also intimidated because they're ruled by Islamist terrorists who don't mess around. But it's understood that Hamas and in the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority, are always going to prioritize the war and treat the well-being of their people, which is their responsibility, because after all, Hamas rules a independent Palestinian state in all but name in Gaza. That isn't important to them, because what's important to them is fighting Israel. And anything that goes to so they're not protesting the fact that homes aren't being rebuilt and instead tunnels are being built. This is considered acceptable. Even more, and just as important, is the whole idea of corruption in Palestinian politics. This is true in the West Bank with Palestinian Authority, as well as in Hamas, where supposedly the Islamists there are more scrupulous. They're not. both of these governments, and that's what the Palestinian Authority and Hamas are, as well as being, in Hamas's case, a terrorist group, and in Fatah, the Palestinian Authority ruling party, a semi-terrorist group, both of them have accepted and have forced their people to accept the idea that their use of the public money can be used for whatever they want. There's no accountability. If this was South America, we'd kind of call it a banana republic, pejorative. But that's what Palestinian politics is.
Yes.
In what happened what's going on in the West Bank under the Palestinian Authority is a kleptocracy. The same is true of Hamas. So it can't be surprising when other groups that operate there with Hamas's permission are siphoning money to the same people. It's just par for the course.
Mm-hmm. By the way, in your piece, John, you point out that in essence, Mahmoud Abbas is also complicit here. Speak about that for one moment. You don't only talk about Hamas, you talk about Fatah as well. But speak about the extent to which you wanted to mention Mahmoud Abbas in your piece.
Well, I think it's very important to understand that the same kind of hijinks, Fatah is not currently involved in digging tunnels and shooting rockets at Israel. If anything, and again, in this very complicated situation, Abbas depends upon Israel to protect him against Hamas. That's the irony here.
Yes.
But Fatah and the Palestinian Authority have taken in over the course of the last 20 years billions, many billions. Makes what was stolen in Gaza look like chump change. Many tens of billions, maybe hundreds of billions of dollars have gone into the Palestinian Authority and have been spent on either terrorism, and to date, they continue to fund terrorist pensions for terrorists with international aid money that comes from Europe and the United States, as well as stealing large amounts of it that wind up in their Swiss bank accounts. So this is, again, a complete culture of corruption, and in which there is no accountability for Palestinian structures. There's no accountability for charities there, because the money all goes to either the people in power or to the war against Israel. And that is what the Palestinian population has come to accept. They are also, as much as Abbas and Hamas are complicit and involved in this, the Palestinian people have accepted this as something that they have to live with, because they're not willing to force their leaders to make peace and to start concentrating on building a better life for their people.
All right, speak about that for one moment. To what extent do you believe there is within the Palestinian people, ordinary men and women, fathers and mothers, a real desire for some peace agreement between Israel and Palestinians that will end the war, end the enmity, end the violence, and begin to permit the Palestinian society to rebuild itself, or to build itself in reality? To what extent is there that feeling? Or, Jonathan, are you suggesting that because there is this ideology that you referred to a few moments ago, that the ultimate goal is not to build Palestinian society until Israel is eradicated, that even within the Palestinian people, there is an overwhelming sentiment that the Palestinian people, will be willing to turn an eye, be willing to live with all of the corruption, because they understand the corruption is in some way tied to this ultimate battle to destroy the state of Israel. Is this a problem that extends only to Palestinian leadership, or do you believe it is also reflected in the rank and file average Palestinian man, woman, husband, wife, parent, grandparent?
I think anybody who visits in the areas, in the territories, can come back with anecdotes of encounters with people who want peace, who are, have common humanity with us. That they don't necessarily want to kill every Jew they meet. They would like to live in peace with their Jewish neighbors. I think there are plenty of Palestinians that feel that way. And when you get into an encounter with them, that's a lot of what you'll hear. But we also have to take into account how they act as a group and what policies they're willing to tolerate. So while I'm willing to, if we were talking, there are many advocates of the peace process who continue to say, no, 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 the Palestinian people want peace. The focus, the onus should be on Israel. Yet, it's not just the leaders of the Palestinian Authority and Hamas who are willing to prioritize the war and to deprioritize the welfare of the Palestinian people. Every survey of Palestinian public opinion, there was a great study of this done by Daniel Palisar of Shalem College that was published in Mosaic magazine last fall that I've often referenced and that I would refer to your readers, that shows that the Palestinian population, ordinary Palestinians, are still willing to applaud violence against Israelis or Jews, still do not think that Israel has any legitimacy, no matter where its borders might be drawn. That they don't accept a Jewish state anywhere in the country. 1967 border is nothing. As far as they're concerned, Tel Aviv and Haifa are settlements just as much as the most remote West Bank hilltop settlements. These attitudes are pervasive. Mm-hmm. They are rooted in religion. They're also rooted in a sense of national identity. Mm-hmm. This is part of the tragedy of the Palestinians.
Yes,
in that they came into. I'm not going to say they came into existence per se in just the last century. Arabs were living there before, but as a sense of national identity arose as a counterattack against the arrival of large numbers of Jewish immigrants who were returning to the land of Israel. Palestinian nationalism, Palestinian national identity became inextricably linked with the war on Zionism. In fact, it's hard to imagine a Palestinian national identity at this moment, and certainly as it's existed, without that war to sustain it. It's not rooted in other things. It's not rooted so much in culture or language or all of the things, if we study nationalism, we study peoples, we look at the history of the Zionist movement. It wasn't just about land and fighting. It was about building a home, building a culture, Hebrew, all those things. Palestinian nationalism has always revolved around the war against Israel. Mm-hmm. And although we can meet many individual Palestinians who will say, yes, I would love peace. Yes, I don't want killing. Yes, I want a better life for my children, just as everybody else does in the world. And yet their political culture is one which as I say, prioritizes the war, because without the war, what is Palestinian identity? If they are going to have to reimagine their sense of themselves, if they're ever going to accept a two-state solution, which is the ideal solution to the conflict, that's the problem. It's not just leaders. It may well be that there are people who meet with a Mahmoud Abbas and tell you that he's just a great guy. I mean, I think there's plenty of evidence to the contrary. But even if we were to grant all of these laudatory things that are said about him, and again, I have a tough time accepting that given his behavior, given his history. But even if he wanted to make peace, he understands, as Yasser Arafat before him understood, the Palestinian people will not tolerate what they consider a betrayal. We talked about refugees before. They have bought into this idea that the descendants of the few 100,000 people who fled their homes in 1948 with the thought that they would be able to return to them after the newborn Jewish state was destroyed, that all of the descendants of these people, 4 or 5 generations by this point, will someday return to what is now the Israel, pre-1967 Israel, not the West Bank, not Gaza, and therefore swamp Israel, destroy Israel. If there is a two-state solution, these people don't get to go back to where they think they're from. And that, again, involves a complete reimagining of Palestinian identity, of Palestinian politics, that their leaders certainly are too afraid to try, and that the people are not demanding. Let's understand something. A few years ago we saw the Arab Spring, which ended in failure in just about every place around the world, around the Middle East. But it's not as if Arabs and Muslims are incapable of protest. It's not as if they, feel no sense that their rulers should have impunity to abuse them. But the Palestinians, there was no Arab Spring because they are still locked into this war mentality as a group, as a people, never mind what individuals might want. And until that changes, they will tolerate a great deal and have tolerated a great deal because the alternative is making peace with Israel, recognizing the legitimacy of a Jewish state, and then concentrating on building up their own lives.
Yes, that's a brilliant analysis. I really hope everybody heard everything you said, and I am very grateful for it. I only have a minute left with you. I am not asking you a political question. This is not about Trump or Hillary. This is about the current administration under President Barack Obama. And it is not only about him, it's about successive American administrations and State Departments. Jonathan, when you ask yourself, what seems to be so obvious to you, so obvious in terms of reality, why is it that the American administration and that successive State Departments have not been able to see the problem as you just defined it, or articulate the problem in terms that you just used? You only have a minute, but I want an answer.
The short answer, the answer on one foot, as we would say,
yes,
in the sense of Jewish liturgy, is that they have been looking at the problem through the wrong end of the telescope for 70 years. And quite frankly, a lot of the Jewish community here in this country looks at the problem from the wrong end of the telescope.
Which is?
Which is to say that they still labor under the delusion that Israel can make peace by itself, that something that Israel can do, that the Jewish people can do, that is the obstacle, that they do not give the Palestinians agency. They don't credit them for the responsibility for making the decisions that they've made. They continue to think that if only Israel will do fill in the blank, XYZ, free settlements, give up territory, be nice, something, that the Palestinians will give them, will make peace. And what their basic mistake is that they don't think about the Palestinians. They don't give them credit for being who they are, and I don't mean that as a pejorative, for having the goals that they have.
Yes.
And until you focus on the obstacle to peace, which is Palestinian intransigence, because after all, Israel has offered the Palestinians a state in almost all of the West Bank, Gaza, share of Jerusalem even, a few times already. Even Benjamin Netanyahu has shown a willingness to withdraw from most of the West Bank in negotiations. Until the Palestinians are willing to say yes to something, all of the discussions, all of the debate about the Middle East peace process is essentially focusing on the wrong side, as I said, looking at the problem through the wrong end of the telescope. And it's no surprise that they continually are frustrated that all of their efforts all fail because they're not actually answering the problem that needs to be addressed.
Okay, on a future program, I want to delve into that more with you. To me, it is a fascinating dynamic of world global politics. But Jonathan, you're doing a fabulous job. You wrote a fabulous piece on online commentary. I hope everybody sees it. And I'm so grateful that you always give me time. Be well, my friend. We'll talk soon.
Thanks very much.
Be well. The views of Jonathan Tobin, senior online editor for Commentary Magazine, saying some very important things, important insights into issues relating to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and here talking about a real scandal of how money is being siphoned off from Palestinian social purposes to really fund murder. My thanks as always to production coordinator Serge Goldberg, who's also our director filling in for vacationing Sloan Copeland, to our editor Dennis Golan, to JBS's associate director Dara Golub, and to the producer of In the News, Carol Lilienthal. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.